Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to The Plant Path. I'm your host, Seja Popham, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and Natura Sophia Spagyrix. And I thought I would do a book review because it's been a little while since I've done one of those. And I was standing there and I was looking at my library and I was like, I was thinking to myself, what was one of the most impactful books, or what was one of my favorite books when I first got into herbal medicine? And I think one of the things that most people tend to really enjoy, especially when you're just getting going with herbal medicine, but honestly, if you should probably hopefully still enjoy it, even if you've been doing it for a while, is medicine making, right? Is the actual act of taking those plants and preparing them, transforming them into a form that you can take, that you can use, that you can put on, that you can somehow utilize in a way that will impact your health in a positive way. And that is why today I will be sharing with you my thoughts about the Herbal Medicine Maker's Handbook by James Green. This was probably one of the earlier herb books. This was our textbook that we used in the herb lab while I was studying at Bastyr University. And I think this is one of the more comprehensive, in-depth, as the name implies, handbook for herbal pharmacy, right? I think this is the best place to start for those of you that are wanting to learn about medicine making, for those of you that are wanting to dig in to the art and craft that is herbal pharmacy. Now, I like to acknowledge this book in the way that James, first of all, he's fun to read. I think he's a great writer. I think it really struck me when, when I got this book when I was like probably 20 years old, and he was like, herbal medicine is a little bit like dancing. And I was like, yeah, I like to dance. I like this guy. He really walks you through kind of in the order, in the process of how you go from basically raw plant to final product, which I really appreciate. So really this book begins with a little bit about your herbal garden or wildcrafting practices, the process of harvesting those herbs, and then preparing those herbs to get ready to be made into medicine, whatever form that might be. So in many instances, that is the process of rendering that herb down into smaller size, what I tend to refer to as particle or size reduction. Garbling, this would be the process of separating the part of the plant that you use from what you don't use. Or cleaning is another way of thinking of it. So with roots, for example, you're cleaning any rot off of those roots. You're cleaning all the dirt off of those roots. For aerial parts where you cut the whole above part plant down, you're stripping leaves off of big thick stems, for example. That garbling process, I always like to say, is a really important part of medicine making. It can be very tedious. It can be very time consuming, but man, a good garble on your herbs really is the difference between a significantly stronger medicine or not, especially when it comes to removing things like leaves from stems. Those stems, which are not notably medicinal for many plants, they tend to be very dense. They tend to be very heavy. They take up a lot of the weight in, say, determining the ratio of your weight to volume ratio of a tincture. If a lot of that weight is in stem, it's going to really affect the potency and the strength of your final tincture. So the garbling process is really important. Then he goes into a lot of the pharmacy equipment, just some of the basic stuff that you need for your kitchen pharmacy. Now, I will mention here that this book, I would say, it's written in the term, it's right there, a home manual. Okay, so this is really for, I would say, home use herbalists, right? Maybe the herbalist that is making some medicine for yourself, for your family, for your friends. Maybe you've got a little clinic and you want to make some preparations for your clinic. That's great. This book is really not designed for larger scale manufacturers in the sense of, when he goes through the equipment that you use and like all of that. Obviously, this is the equipment that he's recommending is more for your home kitchen scale. When you get into more commercial production, you're going to use different equipment because the scale is much larger. So you're not using mason jars, you're using large, say, stainless extractors, you're getting larger presses, you have large distillers, or whatever it is that you're doing is larger scale. So the equipment looks different on a commercial scale. So just mentioning that this is more home scale use in terms of the equipment recommendations. Now, what I also appreciate about James is that he goes through your main solvents, and it's not just like a recipe book, but what I like about this book is that he takes the time to really explain everything. So for example, with solvents, he's not just saying, oh, use this for that. He really is breaking down your menstruums, the main liquids that you use as solvents to extract herbs, and why you use them, why you use each of these menstruums. So he goes through water, he goes through alcohol, he talks about wine and vinegar, he talks about mixtures of water and alcohol, oil and glycerin, how these different menstruums act on the plants, what they tend to extract biochemically, why you would prefer one menstruum over another. Okay. This is really, really important because good medicine making ultimately comes down to, in a lot of ways, choosing the right menstruum for the right plant. If you're trying to extract the resins from frankincense with water, good luck. If you're trying to extract the mucilaginous polysaccharides from Ulmus rubra with 95% alcohol, good luck. Like, that's not going to work, right? So this is where understanding the specific nuances of your menstruums, what they extract, when they are appropriate or inappropriate, is very important. This also gets into kind of good little tricks. So for example, if you're making a tincture of an herb that's rich in alkaloids, well, James breaks down the importance of vinegar, right? And how vinegar, we often think of using vinegar to extract minerals, which it is one of the best menstruums for extracting minerals, but it's also really, really great for extracting alkaloids. Because when you add a small amount of vinegar to your water and alcohol menstruum, you're actually acidifying that menstruum, and that acidic menstruum is going to draw the alkaloids out significantly better. So that's like, for example, doing that on your lobelia tincture is usually a pretty good idea. You can even add a little bit to your ashwagandha to pull out your ashwagandha alkaloids, etc. So very, very nice. The way that he talks about our different solvents that we use, how to use them, what they pull out, and this chapter here, principal constituents of plants and their solvents. This is a very, very important section of this book. I think it's the most important section of the book, honestly, because this is your fundamental principle of good medicine making. This is what you need to know. I always like to say that studying pharmacognosy or plant chemistry doesn't really make you a better practitioner of herbal medicine. It doesn't make you a better clinician. It makes you a better pharmacist. It makes you a better medicine maker. So this chapter, super key. Love that he breaks it down. Everybody always, this is the question I get all the time is, what percentage alcohol do you use to extract this herb or that herb or the other? Well, I think if you're really serious about being a good medicine maker, this is the chapter you need to read. There's another book I'll do a book review on later, written by my teacher in herbal pharmacy, or at least my first teacher in herbal pharmacy, Dr. Eric Yarnell. Really comes down to knowing the chemistry in the herb and then what their solubility range of those chemicals are. So, like, for example, he says here, for preparation of extracts with the highest levels of alkaloids, water, vinegar, alcohol, menstrua, having a 35% water to 10% vinegar to 55% alcohol content are recommended. That's for alkaloids. And he goes through this with balsams, bitter compounds, essential oils, camphors, flavonoids, glycosides, gums, gum resins, mucilages, sugars, starches, proteins, resins, oleoresins, saponins, fixed oils, tannins, etc. So, very, very nice chapter there. Next, he gets into your forms of herbal medicine. This is a very simple section here where he's really breaking it down based on, okay, you have your internal preparations, you have your topical preparations, you have your menstruum-based preparation. So for internal, you've got things that just use water, such as infusions, decoctions, concentrates, jellos, hydrosols, flower essences. You have your alcohol-based menstruum. These are basically your tinctures. You have your different methods of making tinctures that he goes into a lot of detail. Tincturing by maceration, tincture by percolation, how to do your fluid extracts or your one-to-one extracts. Wine, vinegar, glycerin, oil. These are all different ways of drawing out the constituents based on what menstruum you're using. Sugar or honey-based menstruums. I love this. Preparations not using a menstruum. So this would be like a succus where you juice the plant. Capsules, pills, powders, lozenges. Basically different ways of preparing a dried powdered herb to just ingest the whole herb. Then he's got all these different topical applications that you use, you know, on the skin, in your eyes, in your ears, for the mucosa, say, in the rectum, intravaginal, throat, lozenges, things like that. So you have liniments, lotions, creams, hydrosols, flower essences, medicated oils and salves, ointments, balms, suppositories, boluses, fomentations, poultices, baths, douches, all variety of preparations. And that basically breaks down the framework for the rest of the book. So he's going through all of these different methods of preparation, even the simple ones like making a tea. Like, what is the difference between an infusion and a decoction? How do you know whether an herb is best extracted as an infusion, which, if you're not familiar, is basically the way most people think of making tea, where you just pour the hot water over the herb, cover it, and allow it to steep for a period of time. The decoction is more active boiling, where you put the herb in the water, in the pot, on the fire, and you bring it to a low simmer. But how do you make a good decoction? Do you want it ripping, boiling? Do you want it gentle simmer? Do you cover it? Do you not cover it? How long do you decoct it? How do you know when an herb should be decocted versus infused? This is all things that Green goes into in this book. Now, of course, for me, as a predominant tincture maker, I really like his tincturing sections here in this book, where he goes into, tincturing by maceration and tincturing by percolation. Now, obviously, the herbal tincture is one of the most commonly used forms of herbal medicine in the modern day. Why is that? Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One, a tincture is well preserved. Okay, so if the alcohol percentage is over 25, 27%, it's well preserved. I generally don't like it to be less than 30. So I prefer 30% alcohol or greater. But if you're over 30% alcohol, you're well preserved. This is not going to go bad, unless you leave it in on the dashboard of your car and you live in Phoenix and it's August or something like that, right? It's like, okay, that might not be as great as it was before you did that. But if you store them well, they will be well preserved and last a nice long time. They're concentrated, right? So with a tincture, you can usually take a small amount of a tincture, depends on the herb, but anywhere between 1 to 5 milliliters of a tincture is typically a sufficient dosage for many herbs. There are some where we take them only in drop dosages if they're a lower dose herb, but they're concentrated. So you can, in that way, they're pretty convenient for a lot of people. You don't have to drink a huge cup of foul tasting tea. You don't have to mix a powder blend. You don't have to swallow 9 huge capsules. It's just a small amount of liquid tincture, maybe in a glass of water. You knock it back and you're good to go. They're small, they're convenient, they're easy to travel with. You can take them in your purse, take them to your office, at work, whatever it might be. Tinctures, in general, very common way of extracting and preparing plants. The other thing is that most herbs tincture well. There are a handful of herbs that really are best prepared as a water extract, or maybe they don't tincture very well. But for the most part, most plants will prepare well as a tincture. You can have, and again, it's because you have this nice spectrum of, a more watery tincture at 30% alcohol, which will draw out water soluble compounds very nicely, to, high alcohol soluble compounds like resins, volatile oils, oleoresins, things like that will only really extract in a high percentage alcohol. That's very good too. So he goes through the process of how to do your tincturing of fresh herbs and versus dried herbs. He does your basic folk method. Now, honestly, I am just not a fan of the folk method. I don't think people should do the folk method. I think if you're if you're just, maybe you're a homesteader and you just want to have a couple herbs on hand that you grow in your garden, and you just want to do it pretty simple, okay, folk method like that is probably fine. But if you would want to consider yourself an herbalist and you want to be a professional at this, you take herbalism very seriously, this is like part of your career, and you're going to be making some medicine, you really need to do the math, do the simple math to calculate your weight to volume ratio of the herbs. I think that's really, really important. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, weight to volume ratio, that would mean this is a way of calculating how many grams of herb are present per milliliter of tincture. And it's usually, denoted as a number that is your gram, colon, to another number, which is your milliliters. So grams to milliliters. So that's where you'll see 1 to 5. That means you have 1 gram of herb per 5 milliliters of tincture. 1 to 1 would be 1 gram of herb per 1 milliliter of tincture. This is how you calculate your herbs, your tinctures, and your weight to volume ratios. So for example, a 1 to 2 tincture of a dried herb extract would be, say, 1,000 grams of herb, and you're using a total of 2,000 milliliters of menstruum, whatever percentage alcohol, to extract that herb. So I think that's really, really important. I think this is something that shouldn't be skimped on. If you really consider yourself a professional, you want to be, especially if you're practicing, you want to know the concentration of the extract you're using. You also want to make sure, if you're working with a client and you're administering them a remedy and you run out and you need to make another batch, you need to make sure that the new batch is going to be of the same quality, concentration, consistency as the previous batch, so that you can give it to them with confidence to know it's going to work. So I am a firm believer in weight to volume method of tincturing. Of course, I tincture herbs commercially, do spagyrics commercially. So, that's something that I have to do. But I also think it's just, I think it's the responsible thing to do personally. And especially you get into some stronger herbs, you need to know that ratio so you don't give someone too much. You need to know your poke root concentration, your pulsatilla, your lobelia, your cayenne. Like, you need to know that so you don't give someone too much. Now, the one thing I will mention, and I'm not, I'll be slightly critical of the fresh herb. So, he is very much mentioning that, talking about using 95% alcohol on pretty much all fresh herbs and doing them mostly 1-to-2 ratio. Now, the 1-to-2 weight to volume ratio, that I can agree on. What I don't agree on is just across the board 95% alcohol on everything that's fresh. I don't think that is very precise. Every herb, so if we think of it, every herb is going to have its own unique amount of water in it. Every herb has a certain percentage of water present within it. And those are going to be vastly different from herb to herb. We also have, as I mentioned earlier, each herb has its specific percentage of alcohol that will most optimally extract that plant's unique chemistry. Okay, so the plant has its unique chemistry. That chemistry has its particular percentage of alcohol that will best extract it. And that herb has its own unique percentage of water that's latently present within the fresh herb. I am of the opinion that to just assume that pouring 95% alcohol over that fresh herb, right? When you pour 95% alcohol on a fresh herb, the water in the herb naturally dilutes that percentage of alcohol down. So to assume that putting 95% alcohol on any fresh herb will automatically dilute that alcohol down to the exact percentage of alcohol that will optimally extract the chemistry of that herb is, I think, unlikely. And I know this because we calculate that in our lab. So what we tend to do is take the fresh herb, we weigh it, we dehydrate it completely, we reweigh it, we do some simple math to calculate what's the percentage of water in that herb. There's some other math that you can do to determine basically how many milliliters of water that would be based on the weight of water. And then you would say, okay, we can assume that in however large our batch size is, say we've got 25 pounds of herb, we can say, okay, 25 pounds of herb here, this much of that weight is water weight, which equates to about this many, say, milliliters of water. So we already have this many mils of water in the herb alone. And we know, oh, this herb best extracts at 45% alcohol. So then when we're doing all of the math to determine, okay, we got 25 pounds of herb, we need this to be at a 1-to-2. So we calculate, okay, we need this many mils of menstruum total at this percentage of alcohol. Well, we got to account for all of that water that's already in the herb. So you got to subtract that amount from your menstruum and your water ratio. And pretty much never does that turn out to, oh, I'm just going to dump 95% alcohol over the herb. There's always a small amount of water, depending on, not always a small amount, that will be added to the menstruum to extract that fresh herb in order to account for how much water's in the herb, how much is that going to dilute my menstruum, to make sure that once it is dilute, I'm sitting right at that optimal percentage range for extracting that specific plant. So I would say that's my one kind of thing about the way that, and I find this really, really common in the way fresh herbs are discussed. There's a lot of herbalists that I really respect and really are very intelligent and really know their stuff. But for some reason with the fresh stuff, they just seem to say, just dump 95% alcohol over it. And I'm like, wait, what? That just seems really imprecise. And I am a very precise person, like to treat each herb very individually, understand the nuance of each plant and what its unique needs are, and to try to prepare it accordingly. So that's just a little bit of, I guess a little bit of criticism on that approach, but otherwise all the tincturing stuff's really good. Percolation, very good. And then he's got all these different forms of infusions: wine, vinegar, glycerin, and oil infusion. Now the oil infusion part is very important because the oil base is the foundation for many other preparations. So the preparation of the oil infusion is really the beginning of many of those topical preparations, whether that be ointments, salves, and balms, which in many ways are similar things. I think just kind of different consistencies. Like an ointment, I find an ointment tends to be a little softer than a salve. A salve tends to be a little bit harder, more firm. A balm is more of almost like an aromatic kind of thing. Lotions and creams, of course, these are emulsified oil and water preparations, which of course begin with an infused oil. They can also be made with hydrosols can be used as the watery component. So rather than just using straight water for the cream, you can prepare an herbal tea, you can prepare a hydrosol to further medicate your baseline things that you're using in there. Suppositories and boluses. These are good preparations to know of, specifically for treating. Oftentimes these are used to treat like intravaginal infections, vaginitis, different forms of infections that can take place there, basically. So these are essentially salves that are poured into molds, like bullet-shaped molds that are easy to insert. But there's some really important herbs to consider there for treating those types of things. Herbal jellos. I've never done much with jellos. Syrups, honeys, oxymels, and electuaries. Very good. Syrups. I like to mention this one. Syrups are a really good way of administering herbs. Obviously, the more common use of that is for cough syrups. And I think this makes a lot of sense because sugar or honey, by their very nature, are demulcent and soothing to a sore throat, to a cough. They are mildly expectorant and kind of demulcent and soothing. So it makes a lot of sense as a means for delivering syrup. But boy, the physiomedicalists and the eclectics used syrups quite a bit as a means of preservation and as a means of delivery. Yeah, a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down a little bit better. So I like the syrups section. Oxymels, if you're not familiar, is a combination vinegar, honey extract. Oftentimes they are made, you can make some pretty nice oxymel like salad dressings. There's ways of doing infused vinegars, infused honeys with infused oils with herbs that you all combine together to make, like nice salad dressings and things like that. And then he's got more topical things: poultices, fomentations, baths for water therapy, and then kind of glossaries of terms and some other good stuff. So that is the basic framework for this book. Some of my thoughts on it. James Green, really, really great book. I cannot recommend this book enough. I think anybody that wants to learn how to prepare herbs should have a copy of this book on your shelf. Study it, use it, work with it. It is very, very good. It's enjoyable to read. I think James is a great author. And, he also wrote another book called The Male Herbal, which I really appreciate as a man. Also, it's, I think, maybe one of two, maybe three books that I know of that are herbals specifically written for men's health. There's probably dozens and dozens written for women's health, but not too many for men's health. So I thank you, James, if you ever see this, which I doubt is likely, but if you ever see this, thank you very much for writing that book. I personally appreciate it, and I know a lot of other men out there do too. So do check out his other book, The Male Herbal, which gets into just some of the nuances around men's health and how to address some of those issues with herbal medicine, diet, lifestyle, and all of that. I highly encourage you to pick up a copy of the Herbal Medicine Maker's Handbook. I'm not in any way affiliated or get any kind of kickbacks. I just like to, first of all, I like to recommend good quality books because I get lots of questions about these things very often from you all. So I want to mention that so you can start building your own library. I also like doing my part to help uplift and spread the word of good herbalists and supporting their good work that they do. And I really appreciate James Green's books and want to support his good work. So hopefully this is useful and interesting and you'll learn something new as I talk about these books and do these book reviews. Yes, I'm reviewing the book, but I'm also, also gives me an opportunity to share some, hopefully, I mean, it's interesting to me. Hopefully it's interesting to you too. So thanks so much for tuning into this episode of The Plant Path. If you're watching or listening anywhere other than our website, head on over to evolutionaryherbalism.com. Be sure to join our newsletter where you can get updates on all of our newest content. You can get the monthly distillate, our newsletter that we are putting out to share great free content to the herbal community, get updates on our open enrollment periods for our courses, live workshops that are coming up, and everything else that's going on. If you're on YouTube, podcasts, wherever you're watching, listening, be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help support the channel more than you might know so that we can continue to publish free content for the herbal medicine community. And I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy life to tune in here. And until the next one, take care and be well.